The studio smelled like cigarette smoke and hairspray and the particular electricity that only lives in places where people perform. Burbank, 1987. Stage 3 NBC. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The audience had been seated for 40 minutes. They'd been warmed up by a comedian nobody would remember, fed a joke about Reagan's hair, and now they sat in that particular state of collective anticipation. Coats folded on laps, faces tilted forward, ready to be entertained, ready to laugh, ready to witness something. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Johnny Carson adjusted his tie for the 4th time in 3 minutes. His desk was immaculate, as always. A glass of water, a coffee mug that contained nothing, a pencil he never used but always touched. He was the most comfortable man in America when the cameras were rolling. But tonight, something was sitting differently behind his eyes. A small, careful watchfulness that his producers recognized from experience. They had booked 2 guests who had never shared a couch before. The first was Donald Trump, 41 years old, freshly off the cover of Time magazine, author of The Art of the Deal, which had spent enough weeks on the bestseller list to make him a household name in a way that his buildings alone never quite managed. He arrived backstage 45 minutes early, which nobody expected. He stood in the green room in a navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he talked. He talked to the stage manager, to the lighting technician, to the production assistant who was 22 years old and just trying to carry a clipboard without dropping it. He talked about the book, about the ratings the show would get tonight because of him, about a tower he was building in Manhattan that would change the skyline permanently and irrevocably, like a signature you couldn't erase. The production assistant smiled and nodded and wrote nothing on her clipboard. The second guest was Dean Martin, 60 years old, Rat Pack, Dino, the man who made a generation believe that life was a slow song played in a room full of soft light and good whiskey. He arrived 12 minutes before his segment, which was exactly on time by his own private calendar. He wore a tuxedo the way other men wear skin, without thinking about it, without effort, as though it had grown there naturally over the course of a long and well-lived life. He accepted a glass from a stagehand with a nod that communicated more warmth than most people's full conversations. He did not talk about himself. He asked the stagehand about his weekend. These 2 men had never met, and the producers, in the way that television producers always tell themselves comfortable lies, had decided that this would be fine. Interesting, even good television. They were right about one of those things. Trump came out first, and the audience responded the way audiences respond to someone they've been told to find fascinating. Applause with curiosity built into it. He walked to the chair with particular stride of a man who has decided in advance that every room he enters already belongs to him. He sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and within 90 seconds he had redirected Johnny's first question back toward his own book. Johnny let him. Johnny always let his guests run for a while. It was part of his genius. The long leash, the patient smile, the occasional raised eyebrow that said everything without saying anything at all. He asked about the real estate market. Trump told him the real estate market was, frankly, extraordinary right now, especially if you knew what you were doing, which most people didn't, but he did. He asked about the book. Trump said the book was outselling everything. He said the word winning 4 times in 6 minutes, and each time he said it, he leaned forward slightly, as though the word itself had weight, and he was placing it carefully on the desk between them. The audience laughed when they were supposed to laugh. They nodded when he cited numbers. There was a specific kind of charisma at work, aggressive, bright, relentless, the kind that fills a room so completely there's no air left for doubt. Johnny smiled his careful smile and turned toward the curtain. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Dean Martin, and the room changed. It changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window in summer. Not loud, not dramatic, just suddenly different, fresher. The applause was immediate and full and came from somewhere deeper in the chest than the applause for Trump had come from. People were on their feet before they decided to stand. An older woman in the 3rd row pressed her hand to her sternum without realizing she was doing it. Dean walked out slowly. Not slowly like someone who was tired. Slowly like someone who understood that arrival was itself a kind of performance, and that the best performances never looked like performances at all. He held a glass, whiskey or something amber, or perhaps just the idea of whiskey, which in Dean Martin's hand amounted to the same thing. He smiled at Johnny. He smiled at the audience. He moved toward the guest chairs with the unhurried ease of a man strolling through his own living room. And then he reached out his hand to Trump. The gesture was natural, automatic, the ordinary human grammar of two people sharing a space. I see you. I acknowledge you. Here's my hand. Trump looked at it. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds. In television time, in live broadcast time, with 10 million people watching and the studio lights humming overhead, and the audience holding a breath they hadn't planned to hold, 2 seconds is an eternity. It is long enough for every person in the room to understand that something has gone wrong. Long enough for Johnny Carson's smile to become something more complex and less comfortable. Long enough for the floor director to look at the producer in the booth with an expression that asked a question nobody wanted to answer. Trump did not take the hand. He shifted in his seat. He looked toward Johnny. He said something about the book again. A reflex, a pivot, the conversational equivalent of a man who has knocked something off a shelf and is pretending he didn't hear it fall. Dean Martin lowered his hand, slowly, without changing his expression. He sat down in the adjacent chair, accepted a light laugh from somewhere in the audience that was more nervous than amused, and crossed his legs and took a quiet sip from his glass. His face said nothing. His face was a masterclass in the art of saying nothing while everything around you is loudly saying something. Johnny moved the conversation forward because that was his job, and he was extraordinary at it. He asked Dean about his upcoming shows in Las Vegas. Dean answered warmly, easily, with a self-deprecating line about his age that got a genuine laugh. He was present. He was gracious. He was, in every visible way, unbothered. But the room knew. The audience knew. The floor director knew. The woman in the third row who had pressed her hand to her sternum knew. The handshake had not happened, and the space where it should have been was still sitting in the air between the two chairs, occupying a silence that the conversation kept moving around rather than through. Trump was talking about leverage, about negotiation. He said that in business, the most important thing was knowing who had power and who didn't. He said that respect, real respect, wasn't something you gave automatically. It was something that was earned. He said this looking at Johnny, but the geometry of the room made it impossible to misunderstand who the comment was directed toward. Dean took another sip, listened, waited. Johnny asked him something about the old days, about the Rat Pack, about Sinatra. Dean answered with a story that was funny and warm and slightly melancholy in the way that all the best stories about the past are slightly melancholy. The audience loved it. For a few minutes the room was his, completely and genuinely his, and Trump sat beside him with the particular stillness of someone who does not enjoy not being the center of attention, but cannot find the right moment to reclaim it. Then Dean set his glass down. It was a small gesture, but it was deliberate in the way that small gestures are sometimes deliberately deliberate. And the people who were paying attention, Johnny, the front row, the camera operator who had been doing this for 19 years, they noticed it. Dean turned slightly in his chair, not aggressively, not with any performance of confrontation. He turned the way you turn towards someone when you have decided to actually speak to them. You know, he said, his voice carrying that particular warmth that made it sound like he was talking only to you, regardless of how many people were listening. I've been sitting here enjoying your conversation. You're clearly a man who knows a great deal about a great many things. Trump nodded, accepting this as a tribute it appeared to be. So I'm curious, Dean said, and forgive me, because I'm an old man, and sometimes old men ask the things that younger, more polite people have already decided not to ask. A small laugh from the audience. Johnny's pencil was perfectly still on his desk. Why didn't you shake my hand? The question was quiet, conversational. It arrived in a room the way a very sharp thing arrives. Not with noise, but with a sudden awareness of an edge. Trump's expression shifted. A brief recalibration, visible for only a moment before the confidence reasserted itself. He smiled. He said that he had a tremendous amount of respect for Dean, that Dean was a legend, an icon, a real piece of American culture, and that he hadn't meant anything by it. He'd simply been in the middle of a thought, and that's not an answer, Dean said, still warm, still easy, still utterly, completely calm. The audience made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a laugh and was entirely human. The sound of a collective recognition that something real was happening. Johnny Carson looked at his pencil. Trump recrossed his legs. He said that respect was something he took very seriously, that he had worked his entire life to be around people who had achieved real, measurable success, that he admired what Dean had done, genuinely, but that entertainment, and he chose the word carefully, almost gently, the way you choose a weapon you want to appear not to be using. Entertainment was a different category, a lighter category. It wasn't the same as building something, as creating something permanent that changed a city's skyline and would stand for 100 years. The room was quiet in a way that rooms are rarely quiet. Dean nodded slowly. He looked at his glass. He looked at the audience with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness, and was somehow both at once. He said, "You know, I grew up in Steubenville, Ohio. My father was a barber. We didn't have very much." He paused. Not for effect. Or, if for effect, then the kind of effect that comes from truth rather than performance. I spent my whole life trying to make people feel something. Not think about their problems for 3 minutes. Forget that their backs hurt, or their marriages were difficult, or that they were scared about money. 3 minutes of a song. An hour of a picture. I never built a building. I couldn't tell you a thing about leverage or negotiation. He looked at Trump directly. But I know what it means to walk into a room full of strangers and make them feel, for just a little while, that everything's going to be all right. And I think that's worth something. I think that's worth quite a lot. The applause came before anyone decided to applaud. It was involuntary, the way breathing is involuntary. Trump was nodding. His expression was doing several things at once. "That's very," he started. "That's a beautiful sentiment. Dean, it really is. I'm not finished," Dean said, and the room went absolutely still. Not the controlled stillness of a television, set running on schedule. The genuinely, organically still, the way a forest goes still when something is about to happen, and everything alive in it knows before it happens. "I've been in this business for 40 years, Dean said. "I've sat across from presidents and kings, and the worst people, and the best people, and every variety in between. And I want to tell you something that nobody else in this room is going to tell you. Because they're all too polite and too professional, and they all want to be on television again next week." He smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that arrives after something difficult. "What you did when I walked out here, that refusal, that little moment of decision, that wasn't confidence. I've known confident men my whole life. Confident men shake your hand. Confident men don't need a signal to a room full of people that they've decided you're beneath them." He leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped just enough that the audience leaned with it. That was fear. That was the behavior of a man who is deeply, profoundly afraid that if he extends ordinary courtesy to someone, it will somehow diminish him. And I'll tell you something, son, nothing diminishes a man faster than letting people see how badly he needs them to know he's important. The silence after this was extraordinary. It was a silence of 10 million people watching the same television screen and feeling the same thing simultaneously, which is one of the rarest experiences that television or any medium ever actually produces. Trump's jaw was tight. The careful architecture of his public face was holding, but only just, and the effort was visible in a way it hadn't been visible before. He started to speak once, stopped. He looked at Johnny, who for once had absolutely nothing to offer. No raised eyebrow, no redirecting question, no gentle comedic intervention. Johnny was watching, just watching, because even Johnny Carson knew that there are moments in a room when the best thing a host can do is become invisible. Something moved across Trump's face. It was not comfortable to watch. It was a specific, private discomfort of a man who has been seen, not criticized, not attacked, not dismantled by argument, but genuinely, clearly, accurately seen, and cannot find the angle for which the scene looks like something other than what it is. He was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," he said. 2 words. Flat, unadorned, without the usual architecture of justification built around them. Dean said nothing. He waited. That was... Trump stopped. Started again. "I came out here tonight, and I did that thing. I do sometimes where I need the room to know where I stand before I've even figured out if it matters. And it was... He stopped again. The audience was so quiet that the hum of the studio lights was audible. It wasn't right. It wasn't a strong move. It was exactly what you said it was. Dean Martin picked up his glass. He looked at it for a moment. He set it back down. I've been wrong in front of people before, Trump said, and something in his voice was different now. Quieter, less curated, carrying particular weight of words that are being said for the first time rather than performed. It doesn't happen very often, or at least I don't let it happen very often. But you're telling me something true, and I'd be more of a coward not to say so than I already was for doing in the first place. Johnny Carson's pencil moved slightly on his desk. A small adjustment, a breathing out. Trump extended his hand, not across a boardroom table, not as a conclusion of a negotiation, not with the slight forward lean and the bright certainty that had accompanied every other gesture he'd made since walking out onto this stage. He extended it the way ordinary people extend a hand, open, uncertain, offering something without knowing if it would be accepted. Dean Martin looked at it. The audience did not breathe. Then Dean reached across and took it. His grip was warm and firm, and it lasted exactly the right amount of time. And when he released it, he did not make it a moment of triumph, did not turn to the audience or to camera, did not perform his own graciousness. He simply picked up his glass, settled back in his chair, and said, "Johnny, I believe you had a question about Las Vegas." The audience erupted, not the polite applause of a talk show segment wrapping cleanly, but something that came from the chest, from the gut, the kind of laughter and applause that arrives when people have been moved and relieved simultaneously and don't have words adequate to either feeling. People in the third row were on their feet again. The woman who had pressed her hand to her sternum had tears on her face that she did not appear to notice. Johnny Carson laughed. A real one, not a performance laugh. He touched his pencil. He looked at Dean Martin with an expression that said, in the precise and fluent language of a man who had been watching human beings perform for 30 years, that he had just witnessed something he would not forget. The rest of the segment lasted 11 minutes. They talked about Las Vegas, and they talked about a hotel Trump was considering on the Strip, and Dean made a joke about how the difference between a good casino and a bad one was whether the ice in your glass was real or plastic. And Trump laughed at the joke, genuinely laughed at it. And the room was warm and easy in the way rooms sometimes become after something difficult has passed through them and left the air cleaner. When Dean stood to leave, at the end of his segment, he buttoned his jacket and he looked at Trump one more time. He said, quietly, not for the audience, the kind of thing you say when the cameras are still rolling but you've momentarily forgotten them. "You're going to be fine, kid." And then he walked back to the curtain with the unhurried ease with which he had arrived, glass in hand, the tuxedo fitting like something that had grown there naturally over the course of a long and well-lived life. Trump watched him go. The stage manager gave the signal for commercial break, and the studio dissolved into motion. Camera operators rolling back, producers talking into headsets, the audience releasing a collective breath and turning to one another with the buzzing energy of people who have witnessed something they know they will be describing for years. Trump sat in his chair without moving for a moment, looking at the curtain through which Dean Martin had disappeared. He was still sitting there when the floor director came over to manage the transition. She was 22 years old. She had been carrying a clipboard earlier. Now she stood near him, waiting, and he looked up at her and said, without preamble, without any of the performance that had accompanied everything else he'd said since arriving 45 minutes early to tell a lighting technician about a building that would change the skyline permanently and irrevocably, like a signature you couldn't erase, he said, "Was I really that obvious?" She considered lying, the way 22-year-olds on their first television jobs consider lying to powerful men who asked them questions they might not want answered. She held her clipboard. She looked at him. She said, "Yes." He nodded, a small, private nod. Then he stood and straightened his jacket and walked back to the opposite curtain. The Tonight Show continued for another 40 minutes. There was a comedian and a musical act, and a bit about a trained parrot that could identify state capitals. The audience laughed. Johnny smiled his comfortable smile and held his pencil and moved smoothly from one thing to the next, as he always did, as he would continue to do for years, the most comfortable man in America when the cameras were rolling. But in the green room, before the car arrived to take him home, Donald Trump sat alone for a while, and he was quiet. And it was a particular quiet of a man who has heard something true and is deciding in real time what to do with it, whether to carry it or put it down, whether to let it change him, or find a way to explain away before morning. History, of course, would have something to say about which choice he made. But in that green room, in that particular and unrepeatable moment, the smell of cigarette smoke and hairspray still hanging in the air, the studio lights cooling in the empty stage beyond the door, Dean Martin's whiskey glass still sitting on Johnny Carson's desk. In that moment, he was simply a man sitting alone with the knowledge of something he had done wrong and the strange, uncomfortable, quietly revolutionary experience of having admitted it. The camera was off. The audience was gone. Nobody was watching. And perhaps that was exactly the point.